would you get a load of this ship? Swordship is a dodge-em-up action roguelike that puts you in the cockpit of a high-tech, high-speed boat with the objective of stealing containers of resources for the survivors of this post-apocalyptic reality. What's a dodge-em-up, you may be wondering? Well, sharp and fast gameplay without the combat. You are simultaneously dodging enemies and obstacles and pitting your adversaries against one another in order to earn points and energy. A simple enough concept, but this ship can get challenging, I assure you. Thankfully, controlling your swordship is easy. Maneuver around obstacles using the left stick, dive underwater to avoid collisions and explosions, collect containers and deposit them for a chance at upgrades, extra lives, and higher scores, or explode the containers to clear a screen of enemies. There are also different ship variants at loadout with unique abilities. For example, one variant will deposit containers more quickly once the proper amount of energy is collected, while another will net you more extra lives but no in-game upgrades. Watching the trailer for Swordship, I was initially intimidated by the speedy maneuvering and screen full of bullets, beams, and bombs. It looked fast and frantic, which are not typically things that I gravitate towards in video games necessarily. I don't mind a challenge, but with the caveat that the controls and gameplay loop must be tight, fluid, and fun. Anything less and a game that is meant to be challenging can quickly become frustrating and ultimately end up on my ship list faster than a swordship can dodge a laser. Well, I've come to put your mind at ease because this is not the case for Swordship. Very thankfully. Controls are smooth and easy to learn, but challenging enough to master. Your ship feels light and fast, which is exactly what you need to effectively dodge enemies and barriers. While I was not initially good at the controls, my skills definitely improved with practice and progression, so a death usually felt deserved by the end. My biggest qualm with the gameplay was the slow motion scenes that appeared just after pulling off a particularly daring maneuver. The slowdown looked awfully similar to a game over screen in Swordship, which was a bit confusing, and sometimes I couldn't tell whether I died or I did something noteworthy and good, which is not where you want to be. Other times it seemed that the slowdown would leave my ship in a more vulnerable position, which again, not ideal. It didn't happen often, but it does still feel seaworthy, noteworthy. Swordship's description boasts tactical gameplay, but the word tactical does feel a little bit generous, which was honestly a relief to me. While there are certainly skills that can be honed and practiced, and different strategies that can be implemented to get through a level, it never feels overly taxing on the brain. There were certainly some butt-clenching moments where I escaped certain death by a fraction of a second, but this was more due to learning patterns and rhythms, more so than any sort of strategic thinking on my part, and that's something I can get behind just fine. There is an art to this swordship for sure, so I suppose you could call it a sword art offline. I'll see myself out. Graphics are basic but effective. There's not a ton of enemy variety, but there are only 3 locations, so that's kind of to be expected. You can tell which world you're in primarily by the color of the water and the types of robo baddies and laser beams. The lack of variety might be a deterrent for some who will tire of this ship quickly, but it didn't bother me too much. If it was a longer game, I would have had loftier expectations for environmental changes, though I do wish that the different loadout options for the ship all came with cosmetic changes as well. I feel like that would just add a little bit of something. For a soundtrack, might I offer you some fast-paced electronic driving beats, which I personally am quite fond of. I couldn't help myself from head-bobbing along and more often than not getting distracted by my own grooving and taking a death. It is apparently the price I must pay for great in-game music. Whoever wrote this soundtrack clearly understood the assignment, because if you showed me a completely silent image of this gameplay, this is exactly the type of music I would expect to accompany it, so well done, bravo. As I've already alluded to a few times in this review, Swordship is a short ship experience, though it does at least attempt to offer replayability via the progression section of the game. You can unlock artwork, ship upgrades, weather events, additional challenge, and more. And yes, there are leaderboards for those that are driven by crushing the dreams of friends and strangers alike with a high score. The first time I faced off against against the boss in this game, I thought I was in for hours and hours of increasingly challenging levels in every color of the rainbow, since that's the only way I could really tell the difference between levels. So I was shocked to see the credits roll after defeating it. It was so sudden and anticlimactic, and it left me feeling a bit empty, if I'm being honest. To my own surprise, I really started to get into the gameplay loop. It was satisfying to unlock new upgrades, turn enemies against one another, and ultimately see improvement in my skills as I progressed. I only wish that there was more game to progress through. So all that said, I love the idea of flipping the script on a shoot 'em up, loved that the gameplay wasn't quite as intimidating as I imagined it to be, just wish there was more game to play. And who knows, perhaps this will propel the team behind Swordship to expand upon this idea in the future, because I'd love to see how far this little ship can go. No bullshit.